this video gonna talk a little about the Celts and their origin and this kind of thing. So the first is obviously they start around 1000 before Christ, like BC, and they live in different area in Europe and in Asia. For example, they are in the most oldest of them is the Hallstatt culture that is in Austria. Today's Austria, and they have they find lots of things there, like the bronze vessel, part of a clothing, lots of things because of the salt mine in Austria, in Hallstatt. And so they were very rich there because salt was very expensive at that time, around 1000 to 700 BC. That helps food to help the food to stay good, because the salt put the food in some kind of a freezer in some kind of way to help it, and this kind of thing. Then we have with more like the then they come to the Latin culture in France and Belgium, like Latin, and there was in like France, Austria, in Hungary, Germany, there was the Celtic people. So the Celtic, obviously Celtic was not, it's just the name, but the Keltoi, what the Greeks called them and the Roman called them. But originally the people, the Celts, was many different people with different culture. For example, the Celta-Liberians, they have their own culture, their own gods in Spain, in Portugal. And then we have the people in France, in Austria, in Germany. So it was different, some kind of different. And we have the Picts and the British, and this kind of thing. So obviously the Celt is most famous because they was the first people that conquered Rome. The first people to plunder Rome and then went home. And obviously with they have the leader Brennus, and the Brennus come there with his army, and they have a weighing scale, and Brennus throw his sword there and say, "Vae victim," vote to the vanquished, because the Roman complains. And that time the Romans was much more a very simple army. It was not as there was later on, like the Roman Republic and this kind of thing. Was not as that, not have that organized army. So the Celts defeat them in the Battle of Trebia, and then later on the Celts come fight against the Greeks, and obviously come to Macedon, and the place where Alexander was born, and Philip II of Macedon, was born there, the father of Alexander. And they also fight with different people, the Illyrians, the Thracians, and other people. Celts fight against, and then they fight against some of the Macedonian kings, and they kill one of them, the son of Ptolemy. They kill in a battle. And this kind of thing. So obviously with all of this is that you have the different people, and the language may be some similar in some sense, the Celtic Liberians to the Celts in Austria or the Celts in France. But you also have the difference with the system of art. For example, if you look at Celtic art, you look at the art in Britannia, and you look at art in Spain, like Celtic Liberian art, and you look at art, for example, in Latin, especially in the sword, like the sword hilt. And obviously the most famous sword is the longsword, the Celtic longsword. That is a very long swinging sword. But also there's a very special thing. For example, if you look at the Celtic Liberian sword, it's more like falcata, and more like a forward curved sword, like forward curved. And the Celts in Britannia, the sword was more like a straight sword, and this kind of thing. But some sword the Celts use, that I have seen in a museum in Austria, is that they have similar hilts to like a tulwara sword, like the hilt, not the blade but the hilt, the scabbard, the grip and the hilt, like the shape is somewhat similar to like the Tulvara hilt, like the Tulvara or Pulvara swords, and this kind of thing. So it's interesting also how obviously the Celtic use a heavy weapon like axe or mace weapons, some kind of a mace or club weapons, because obviously some of the Celts use chainmail, and they also use breastplate armor, like they use like Greek armor, because of the rich Celtic have this luxury. Like for example, the people in Celtic Iberia, they have the silver mines, and there was also one big reason why the Romans want to conquer Spain and defeat the new Carthaginians, like the new part when Hannibal and Hannibal's father was conquering Spain, because of the silver mines and lots of lots of money you can earn from the silver. So they also have to build pay lots of war and all this kind of thing. Obviously for the Celt, they want. And so you have obviously this kind of thing, and you have a group of people with similar language. I not know how similar they are, but they have some similarity, but with very big differences with art and belief system that make them different. These two makes them very, very different from each other. Like for example, the Germanic people, like you have the North people, like the Vikings. Then you have the Ostrogoth, the Vandals, and the Longobards. That is also different from each other. They're similar, for example, people in the Native Americans, like people in North America, the steppes, and the South America, is very different. For example, you can even if you compare, for example, people in Peru, and you compare people in, like example, in Guatemala, like the Maya, to the Aztecs or the Toltecs or the Olmecs, are very different from each other. So even if they live in the same place, they are very different. For example, obviously not the Inca, but they live in the Andes in the Peru. But even the Incas have lots of people. That before the Inca was the big empire, there was later on. There was lots of different groups of, for example, different people, like the Amazonians, the Taínos, the Arawaks, lots of different other kind of people. And then you have, for example, people in the north coast, like the Haida, the Tlingit. That also is different, extremely different from the Maya. They have they have totally different guards. They have like totem poles and other different things, like it symbolize a different wooden mask and lots of different things. That make simple to say is a very complex group of culture and custom from different people, from the native and South and North Americans, from the Haida to the Incas to the Aztecs. Like the European called all of them Indians, but that is very incorrect to say, because they are so different from each other. They have different language. You can even find native people in Brazil that have more similarity with their culture with people in Australia, the Aborigine in Australia in some ways, the similarities, then they are similar to people, for example, in the Pacific Ocean, like the Haida. And the Haida's language is a unique language that only every group of people in North and South America have their own language and their own costume and their own guards, and it's too complicated for me to say more than that. I just can say, if you look at example, the best thing you can do is to more easier to understand it, is to look at art. If you look at the Mayan art from like the first Mayan to the final time in Mayan history, and then you compare it, for example, with the art of the Haida art, and then you compare it with art, for example, with the Toltecs, and then obviously you have lots of other people, and you look also what kind of guard they use. For example, the Haida used like the thunder guard, the thunder bird, and the killer whale, like symbolizing like the wolves that go into the sea turn to a killer whale, because similarity with wolf and killer whale, they hunt in pack and all this kind of thing. And then obviously, if we come back obviously to the Celts, is similarity there is the same thing, is that if you, for example, the Celtic Liberians learned to read and write much earlier than the Celts in Britannia and Austria, or in Germany, that later on going to be Germany and Austria, because their connection with the Phoenicians, like come there to connect with the silver mines and all this kind of thing. So you have a very diverse group of culture and people, and obviously with all of this is that is the only difference is the only reason why, for example, the people, the Roman Greeks called the Celts, was because there was not unified people. It was not exactly the same as for example, the Etruscan. The Etruscan was very wealthy people because of the metal mines, the iron mines, but they still was not unified as the like the Greeks under. Like for example, as the Roman was later on. So you have, and obviously lots of, there was a long distance between each other. For example, the Celt in Britannia was far away from the Celtic Liberian in Spain or in Portugal, and that was the time was far from each other. So lots of things that happen in Britannia, the Celtic Liberian don't damage them at all, because they have nothing to do with the Druids that the Britannians have. That, for example, the Celtic Liberian have a totally different system of worshipping than the Celts in Britannia, or people, in example, in Germany and Austria. So there's lots of huge gap between each other, so they have nothing to do with each other, nothing. And the same for example, if you go back to the comparison with the people in Native and America, for example, when the Aztecs Empire was conquered of the conquistadors, the people, like example in the North Coast, like the Haida or the Kalinget or other people there, have nothing to do with them, because they were far away. One today is Canada, and one is today like Guatemala, and lots of it's very different how their system work and their artwork for like the architecture and all these kind of things work together, how they build different things, and is the only thing that why we think they are same because of the name, because we call, as I said before, they call them they call them Indians. Nowadays is a very incorrect word to say, because you give something that is very, it's almost like you say call everybody it's like almost like you say everybody from Europe are the same, but it's different with the culture, with the Vikings and all this kind of thing. Yeah, and then with obviously the conquest later with Boudica in Britannia, the Roman defeat Boudica, and then the Roman defeat people in Spain, fight against the Celtic Iberians, and also this kind of lots of fight with and all different lots of things. And later on, obviously the connection, later on the Celts in Ireland, in Scotland, especially Ireland, the Scot was fight against one of the most aggressive Roman emperor all of history. For example, Caracalla. Caracalla's father was had a long war against the Scots, I don't remember. I don't know exactly what year it was when Caracalla's father fight against in Scotland, and they have lots of war, and obviously, but it's so interesting with all. It's so interesting with all of this is that we have a so big differences with their connection. For example, if you really look back to it, like for example the first, like in like Austria or in Hungary or in like these kind of places like Poland, you have more like connection, for example, with people like the Celt connection with the Scythians or the Sarmatian, like some Celt even in Russia, like the Bosporus kingdom, that there was a Greek kingdom in today's Russia, and it's so interesting because when we call them Celts, we give a very simplification of the whole thing, because we give them, we think they all are the same because we say the name, and take something away from it, because obviously the Celts call themselves their own name, obviously the different names for the different groups and all this kind of thing. And so then obviously, so then you can almost call, so they were before the Germanic people. The Celts was obviously, Germanic people was like in Norway, because you can find also a connection with the what is the people called again? Sorry, they are is in Denmark. It was not the this was the Germanic people, the Swabian. Yes, the Swabians. So some of the Germanic people, for example, the Swabians, or I only remember one, and then Aravistus. So the Swabian probably have connection, meet some of the Celts and learn from their custom, and adopt their custom to their custom, to mix it together, because you can see like in some art form on the cauldron from the Swabi, you can see that they have like the Celtic necklace, the torque, Celtic torque. So there's lots of possibility, and even you can find even in Denmark, you find the cauldron, the very famous cauldron. You see a picture of Celtic people blowing the cornets, the Celtic war trumpet. That is very big, symbolizing for the people, the Celts. But here we come again to a problem, is that most of the time when you see the cornets is only Celt in, for example, in Britannia, or Celtic in today's, like in more like in Italy, but not as much Celtic people in Spain use the cornets. Maybe I'm totally wrong what I'm saying right now, so somebody can leave a comment, explain if something is wrong what I'm saying in this video about the thing. What most of the time when I think about the cornets, I think about people in like from Britannia, or not as much as people in like in Austria or in Spain, and obviously it's much also much later on, and so on. Okay, bye.